Please welcome from the great state of Massachusetts, Senator Elizabeth Warren.
Hello, Netroots! Woo! Thank you. Wasn't Deb Haaland terrific? You know? Deb is strong, smart, and she fights from the heart. I am happy to have the chance to support her campaign. You bet. So I want to start by saying a very big thank you to Mary and to Eric and to Arshad and to the entire Netroots Nation for bringing us back together again. Feels like a family reunion. Great to be back at Netroots. And it's always great to have an excuse to come to New Orleans, so we'll add that part. You know, before I get started, I've been to a lot of Netroots nations, and at every single one of them, my friend, our friend, Joel Silberman, has been backstage to give me advice and to cheer me on. He taught so many of us how to stand taller and how to speak louder for the people we fight for. His passing is a tremendous loss for our community, and my heart goes out to the many of you who loved him. So, I can hear Joel's voice. He's telling me to get on with it, and so I will. You know, I first spoke at Netroots 1 week after President Obama had signed Dodd-Frank and the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau into law. And that is a victory that would not have happened without a lot of early Netroots folks. So thank you for that. You know, those of you who were around back then will remember what an uphill fight it was. For over a year, Wall Street spent more than $1 million a day lobbying against this agency. They called in every favor, they pulled every string, they hired every lobbyist that they could find trying to stop us. But we beat them. We beat them. We did. And since then, the CFPB has gotten $12 billion back for 29 million Americans who got cheated by big banks and other powerful corporations. Yeah. And there's a lesson in that. You know, we didn't make that progress just because a professor had a good idea. We made it because we built a broad coalition of people whose lives were directly affected by these issues, a broad coalition of students and veterans and seniors and working men and women across this country. And we made it because we had a movement that was willing to fight uphill for working people. We were willing to do that. And ever since that rousing celebration 8 years ago, I have left every Netroots feeling inspired, determined, optimistic, and proud. Proud of the movement that we have built together. Proud of how tough and effective we have become. Proud of the change we have made. And most of all, proud of the way we have held on to our values, the values that brought us to this fight. You bet. You know, I never forget what brought me to the fight. I grew up in Oklahoma. My Okies out there. You know, I grew up on the ragged edge of the middle class, and my daddy worked a lot of different jobs. He ended up as a janitor. He and my mom had 3 boys who all headed off to the military, and then there was me. I was the late-in-life baby, referred to as the surprise. I was about 30 before I figured out what that meant. And my mother kept saying, "It's okay, honey, it's okay." But for a long time, we were a paycheck-to-paycheck family. And then slowly, bit by bit, my folks saved up enough money to put a down payment on a 3-bedroom, 1-bath house in a good school district. My folks painted rooms and they worked on flower beds, and they sunk a lot of themselves into that house. It felt like we were starting to pull ahead. And then my daddy had a heart attack. He survived, but he was never the same again. And even after he got out of the hospital, he couldn't go back to the same job. And the bills piled up. We lost the family station wagon. I was a kid, and at night, after my parents thought I was safely in bed, I'd hear them talking. And I'd hear words that sounded like they weighed 1,000,000 pounds. Words like mortgage, words like foreclosure. I heard fear. And one morning, I went into my folks' bedroom, and my mother had laid out her best black dress. And some of you in here know that dress. It's the dress that comes out only for weddings, graduations, and funerals. And my mother was standing there in her slip. She was crying, and she kept saying to herself, "We will not lose this house. We will not lose this house." She was 50 years old. She had never had a regular job. She was scared. She was scared, and she was crying. But by golly, she wrestled on that dress. She washed her face. She blew her nose. She put on her lipstick. She pulled on her high heels, and she walked down to the Sears and got a minimum wage job. And that job, it saved our home, and it saved our family. That is the story that is etched on my heart. It is the story of who I am. But here's the thing about that story. For a long time, I thought that was a story just about my mother, about her courage, about her grit, a story about what women will do to take care of the people they love. Maybe even a story about the American spirit, about pulling up your socks when the going gets tough. But eventually, I came to understand that that story is also a story about government. When I was a little girl, the minimum wage was enough to cover the basics for a family of 3. Today, a full-time minimum wage job doesn't pay the rent on a median 2-bedroom apartment in any state in America. That same job that saved my family 50 years ago wouldn't even keep a mama and baby out of poverty today. So what happened? Well, I'll tell you what happened. When I was a little girl, the guys in Washington set the minimum wage based on what it would take to support a family. And today, the Republicans who run the show and make the decisions like that based on what will maximize profits for the biggest corporations. It really is that simple. And the difference really is that important. Because that story about my family, that story about pride and fear and courage, is a story that countless Americans could tell today about their own families. It's a story that millions and millions of families are living right this minute. And throughout the history of our country, the way that story ends for people who work their hearts out is often determined by one simple question: who does government work for? Is it working for the high and the mighty, or is it working for the people? People save their homes, or they don't. Little girls grow up with a chance to succeed, or they don't. Families make it, or they don't, based on the answer to that question. And that's why, for me, this fight isn't political. It is deeply, deeply personal. The first time I spoke at Netroots, 8 years ago, I talked about my family's story. I talked about surviving the Great Depression in Oklahoma. And during my research as a law professor, people told me a lot of their stories, not numbers on a page, but their stories. Stories about families that worked hard, that scraped to get ahead, that were on the verge of making it. And then something happened. If it wasn't a medical crisis like it was in my family, it was a lost job or a divorce or a death. But whatever it was, it sent people tumbling over the edge. And that's when the predators in the financial industry jumped at the chance to bleed them dry. I'd hear these stories, and I'd hear the pride, the fear, and the courage. And I also heard that question hanging over people's heads, determining their fate. Who does government work for? The powerful corporations, the banks, the credit card companies that had ruined these families, the ones who had ruined these families' lives just so they could make a few extra bucks. They were getting away with it because those who ran the government weren't willing to stand up for working people. By the early 2000s, companies like Bank of America and Wells Fargo were selling mortgages that were like grenades with the pins pulled out, destined to blow up and cost millions of families their homes. They cheated everyone they could, but they drew a special target on the backs of African Americans and Latinos, selling black and brown families the worst of the worst mortgages. And all the while, Washington turned a blind eye as our country headed toward an economic meltdown. All the while, Washington made it even easier for these giant corporations to profit by tricking, trapping, and outright cheating hardworking Americans. And here's the part that always just gets to me about this story. We are a democracy. And in a democracy, it doesn't make sense that leaders could be in the business of standing up for the powerful against the powerless. Our leaders should serve the people. I mean, do the math on it. There's a lot more seniors getting overcharged for their prescriptions than there are pharma CEOs getting rich gouging people on drug prices. Yeah. There's a lot more families that would benefit from a child care tax credit than there are families that pay the estate tax. There are a lot more working moms and dads who go to bed worried about making the mortgage payment than there are CEOs who go to bed dreaming about buying one more vacation home. And in a democracy, all of these moms and dads and seniors and students ought to add up to more than a handful of CEOs and billionaires. But somehow, working people these days have to fight uphill even to get heard, let alone to get their way in Washington. In fact, the hill is steeper than ever before. So here's my question. What is it about our politics that prevents our government from working for working people? How come the majority never gets to rule in Washington anymore? Well, I can think of three things. One, because of Citizens United and the revolving door between industry and government. Because of those, money doesn't just talk in Washington. Money shouts, money screams, money commands. And a lot of politicians on both sides of the aisle follow the money. That's one. Two, Republicans have conspired to rig the rules of democracy itself, using everything from partisan gerrymandering to voter suppression to the census. Thanks to their years of work, the system is badly tilted to make it less likely that millions of Americans' votes are actually cast and counted. And it is no coincidence that the people who are targeted, the ones who are pushed away from the polls, are mostly poor people, young people, minorities, and others who aren't helped by the Republicans in power. Now, these are serious threats to democracy, but they are not permanent. You and I, we can change this stuff. We can overturn Citizens United. Yeah. You bet. We can close and lock that revolving door. We can do that. We can protect the right to vote. We can reform our elections and our government. Yeah, we'll have to fight uphill all the way, but we are not without power. We are not without hope, and we are certainly not without motivation. Yep. never been afraid to be the underdog, and neither have you, Netroots. So let's get in this fight. I believe that together we can save democracy. But I said there were three things that keep government from working for working families. Lots of money, rig the rules, and this, the third. The rich and powerful profit when government doesn't work for working people. And they have learned that the best way to stop us from changing the system is to set working people against each other. So they have become the experts at the politics of division. Frankly, it might be the one thing that Donald Trump is really good at. That and kissing up to two-bit dictators. Yeah. You bet. You know, Trump and his pals tell working people a story about what's gone wrong with their lives. Now, this story is not about big banks cheating customers or insurance companies discriminating against people with pre-existing conditions. Nope, that is not the story. The story is not about drug companies that charge $600 for a pill that costs less than $1 to make, or student loan companies that rip off young people. Nope, that's not the story. It isn't even about billionaires who get out of paying their fair share while we hold back on rebuilding our roads and subways and power grid, or about lobbyists who write tax bills so that the corporations that they work for get special breaks while the average family in America gets nothing. Nope, those aren't the stories that Trump tells. In Trump's story, the reason working families keep getting the short end of the stick isn't because of the decisions that he and his pals are making in Washington every day. No, according to Trump, the problem is other working people. People who are black or brown, people who were born somewhere else, people who don't worship the same, dress the same, or talk the same as Trump and his buddies. And it comes in all sorts of flavors. Racism, sexism, homophobia, xenophobia. It comes in all sorts of forms. Nasty personal attacks, trolling on Twitter, winking at white supremacists. And it all adds up to the same thing, the politics of division. Politics that tries to pit black working people against white working people so they won't band together. Politics of division that tells Americans to distrust each other, to fear each other, to hate each other. Because while we're busy doing that, Mitch McConnell gets to raid the Treasury and give $1 trillion to their rich friends, destroy health care for millions of families, and wipe out Social Security and Medicare. Yeah. They want us pointing fingers at each other so we won't notice their hand is in our pockets. Well, it stops here. It stops here. It stops now. It stops with this movement and this moment and this election. It is time for us to say no to the politics of division. To say no to the ugly use of bigotry and fear. We say, no, you will not divide us. We are here to bring working families together, to demand a government that works for all of us. That's why we're here. Netroots, we're bringing our resistance to Washington, and we're bringing the voices of working Americans, all working Americans, right along with us. You bet. Since Donald Trump took office, I have held 31 town halls across Massachusetts. 31 town halls. Thousands of selfies, hundreds of questions. But here's the thing, there is one question I get at every single town hall. And sometimes I actually get it asked twice at the same event. And it's basically, what can I do to get more involved? All across this country, people are seeing that the guys in charge in Washington are running a game on working families, and they are taking it personally. They are stepping up to do something about it. Men and women, young and old, gay, straight, and trans, soldiers and scientists, teachers and nurses, veterans and college students, firefighters and construction workers, mamas and babies. And this movement, this resistance, this big blue wave that's gathering strength all across this country, we're not trying to fight division with division. Ours is a politics of unity. Yeah. And the reason we're standing together is that for us, these fights are personal. They are about our families and our neighbors and our future. And the stories we tell, yeah, they may not be the same in New Orleans as they are in New England, but they sure rhyme. These stories, etched on each of our hearts, are the threads that hold us together as a country and as a movement. And that's why we can fight for people working factory jobs in small towns and for people working fast food jobs in the inner city. We can do both at the same time. That's why we can stand up for high school kids getting bullied for being gay and for college kids getting crushed by student loan debt. Yeah. And that's why students march in Boston to protect families at the border, why men show up to rallies for women's health care, why, when it comes to fight to protect unions, we are all brothers and sisters in the fight. You bet. And that is why we have come here to New Orleans. Because we believe that in America, every family deserves a fighting chance. And we are ready to fight as hard as it takes, as long as it takes, to deliver on that promise. You bet. I get it. It won't be easy. We're going to have to fight uphill. But me, I'm going up that hill, and I hope you are too. And I hope that when you do, you'll reach your hand out and bring someone else along for the climb, because we can only make it up that hill together. That is why we cannot afford to waste our time arguing about whose fight matters the most. It is one fight. And we have to stand with one another, for one another. We've got to embrace the unshakable truth that an attack on one of us is an attack on all of us. You bet. Now look, I get it. The Republicans will continue to practice the politics of division. They will keep right on attacking anyone who dares to stand up to the rich and the powerful. They will call us every ugly name in the book. Nevertheless, we will persist. The pundits will say it is impossible for us to build a coalition that cuts across issues and communities. Oh, that's what the pundits will tell us. They'll tell us that Democrats have to choose between being the party of the white working class and the party of Black Lives Matter. They will say it. Nevertheless, we will persist. And even when we succeed, the powerful interests that benefit from the dysfunction in Washington will use their money and their connections to try to drown out the voices of working Americans, to stand in the way of the change that we need. And nevertheless, we will persist. I'm so grateful to be here with you today. You know, 8 years ago, you stood with me in the fight for the CFPB. Thank you. And 6 years ago, you stood with me to win the fight for a Senate seat. So today, let's stand together again. Let's stand together. Let's march together. Let's run together. Let's organize together. Let's win together. And together, let's build a democracy where the people's voice can never be silenced. Let's build a future for the country we love. Thank you all. Thank you.